In this video, we'll be taking a look at how we prepare a blank for the wood lathe. In this case, for creating a spindle on the lathe. Now, we need a number of tools. You can see sort of pictured here on the screen. And each of these tools is going to have a different purpose for manufacturing the blank to mount on the lathe effectively. Now, the first step we need to do is to mark in the center of our piece of wood. Now, whether this is a large piece or a small piece, the simplest way to find the center is to draw a diagonal line from one corner to the other and do that on the opposite side as well. And you'll find that where the lines cross over will be the dead center of the piece of wood. Now, once you've got the center located on both edges, we can move on to start marking in the amount of wood that we can use. Now, obviously, to start with this, you've got a squared off piece of wood, and we know that we're creating a spindle, which is going to be a round thing. So there is going to be waste on the edges that we cannot use. So by using a compass here, I'm marking in a circle that is about as wide as we can get down the center here. We can see roughly how much scrap is going to need to come off of the corners, and we've got an idea of how much usable wood we have in the center to create our spindle with. Once we've done that, there are a couple of other things that we want to do to make sure we've got this prepared. Now, it's easiest to do it in this order because it'll go in the vise more easily than it will do once we've started shaping the edges. Now, we're using a forked center on our wood lathe, so in order to key into that effectively, what we're going to do is saw down the two diagonal lines on the one side. Now, we only really need to come down a couple of millimeters. This is just to give it a little bit of a profile that's going to lock into the forked center on the headstock of the wood lathe. Now, on the other end, we're using revolving centers, but it would be the same thing with a dead center. We just need to knock in a little dent in the center there, so it's more easy to locate that pin. We can pop it on both sides just to make our lives a little easier as well. Now, as I said a minute ago, we have got quite a lot of scrap that needs to come off of this just now. The easiest, safest, most effective way to do this is to pop it in the bench vise and use a plane. Now, in this case, we've got a small smoothing plane. If you're working a larger piece, maybe it's a bigger jack plane. But ultimately, we're just going to take these corners down a bit. Once it starts rotating on the wood lathe, if we've got these big corners, essentially each spin of the blank is going to clatter off the tool, and it's going to be very difficult to control, and it will give you silly messy results. By rounding it off a little bit just now and just taking it back to this, rather than a square, taking it back to this kind of octagonal shape, it's going to be much easier to get started on the lathe. Now, we're just going to speed this bit of video up because obviously this takes a little bit of time to do all four, but my suggestion would be to do one corner and then do the opposite corner, because it's much easier to hold in the vise while you're working on if it's on flat surfaces. Next, we're going to show you how to mount this up on the lathe. It's nice and straightforward. The side that we've sawn down will be the side that's going to connect onto the forked center, and the side that's just got the dent on it, that will be connected onto the revolving center. But again, if you're using a dead center, it would be the same thing. Just need a little bit of lubrication in that dent so it doesn't burn. Now, there is a separate video showing you in a little more depth how to mount this up properly on the lathe and check that everything's ready to go before you start. But your blank should now be completed based on the steps in this video.